And we are recording, and you can take it away, Sue.
All right. Thank you, David. I would like to thank everyone for being here today and to join us. My name is Susan Miller. I'm with Darby Creek Valley Association. And this was a program that we put together with Willistown Conservancy Trust and Stroud Water Research to give people an idea of what goes on in our watershed, water quality, but also everything that encompasses our watershed. And with that, I would like to introduce Debbie Beers, who is the Director of Volunteer Engagement at Natural Lands Trust. And she will be talking about the birds that are in Darby Creek. One of the things that we're going to be doing, just to take care of some of the housekeeping, is that you will be muted during the presentation. If you have any questions, you can type them into chat. And at the end of our presentation, Debbie's presentation, we will be going over some Q&A and have some conversation. So with all ado, then I would like to introduce Debbie Beer. Debbie, would you like to share your screen now?
Sure. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Bear with me while I share our screen. Share my screen. All righty. Well, thanks again, Sue, for that introduction, and thanks again, everyone, for joining me. So as Sue said, my name is Debbie Beer. I'm the Director of Volunteer Engagement at Natural Lands. And Natural Lands is delighted to partner with the Darby Creek Valley Association on this Zoom outreach event. Especially during these extraordinary times, we wish we could be outdoors together. I'd much rather be actually holding binoculars and looking at birds in the Darby Creek watershed. But the computer will have to do for this presentation. So just a little bit about Natural Lands. We are a nonprofit, member-supported land conservation organization. Natural Lands has been around for a long time, established in 1953, actually by an accountant, which I think speaks to the health of the organization over the decades. He understood the value of planning fiscally, as well as planning to conserve land and save open space, care for nature, and connect people to the outdoors and to each other. So Natural Lands established a long time ago. We now own 43 nature preserves. We do our work in eastern Pennsylvania and a bit in South Jersey along the Delaware Bay shore there. And one public garden, Stoneleigh, which is fairly new to us. And that encompasses actually over 120,000 acres of land that Natural Lands has helped preserve over time. So we're very grateful to be doing this great work in our region, and many staffers are so committed to land conservation and preserving the land for the benefit of wildlife and people communities. So I'm really glad that Sue, she called me a little while ago and said, would I like to talk about the birds of the Darby Creek watershed? Of course I would. Birding is my passion. Some folks maybe would think of the word hobby, but it's far more than that. I spend all my free time birding, although Natural Lands keeps me very busy in my job, and I'm very fortunate to be able to combine my professional career with my passion and love for birds. So I get to engage and mobilize volunteers in not only land conservation work and stewardship, but also in looking for wildlife, documenting wildlife, including birds. So we have nest box monitors, we have bird surveyors, butterfly surveyors as well. So, so it's great for me. I get to do kind of all birds most of the time. So, and the birds of the Darby Creek watershed include a huge diversity of species, some really amazing birds that you can see, and not just like special things that are only in like dark corners. There's a few of those, but birds that you can see out your backyard or a walk in the local park. This beauty here is a male Baltimore oriole, and indeed they are truly, that's not Photoshop, electric neon orange. Beautiful birds. They whistle loudly and a lot of people see them, and you can see them as well in the Darby Creek watershed. It's a fantastic place to explore, And I live in the Darby Creek watershed right here in Delaware County for more than 20 years. And so I've been fortunate to enjoy so many birds in the area. So Sue put up a map of the Darby Creek watershed, and she actually shared this one with me. I thought it was a great map. This map was actually provided by the Philadelphia Water Department. It's good that they're keeping track of water. That's important. So just a few facts about the watershed itself and why it's all important for the birds that live and thrive in our area. The watershed encompasses 77 square miles in southeastern Pennsylvania, over 123 linear stream miles. If you were to add up all of the blue lines on the map there in the brown shaded area, that's the watershed. It includes portions of Chester, Montgomery, Delaware, and a bit of Philadelphia County. Most of the watershed is located in Delaware County, and I live in Springfield, so it's a bit kind of like bottom central. I was going to say the heart of the watershed, close enough. The Darby Creek and the Cobbs Creek are major rivers of the watershed, and you can see on the map there that, of course, the Darby Creek, the name of the watershed, starting at the upper upstream waypoint there, that actually is in Chester County, and then it snakes all the way down kind of on the left half of the watershed. And if you look on more the right half of the watershed, you see the Cobbs Creek, which is equally as large of a river, and it flows along the edge of Philadelphia there. And the waters flow downstream, of course, and where it comes to the end goes through the John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge. And I will get to that in a bit in my presentation, because that is certainly a fantastic place to explore and discover and enjoy the birds of the Darby Creek watershed. But there's birds in just about every inch of this watershed. So it's really a lot to explore. There are hundreds of species, thousands of birds that you can find in the Darby Creek watershed. So more than 330 bird species have been documented. It would be a great grad student project for someone to actually map all of the bird species that are in the boundaries of the watershed. Of course, birds do not know or understand any political boundaries. These are just imaginary lines that birds don't see. They go back and forth all different places, but certainly more than 330 species, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individual birds that pass through the whole watershed in the wintertime, during the breeding season, certainly during migration, spring and fall migration. The birds are there because of the diversity of habitats in the watershed. So location, it's all about the habitat. So different birds at different times of year and different habitats are found throughout the entire watershed. And I just threw some kind of cool pictures here, some of my favorites. The big one on the left, that's a gray catbird. And I have friends that'll call me and let's say, I saw this bird, is a gray bird with a black cap. And it's great to realize that people can see those field marks. And they ask me, what is it? It's a catbird, gray catbird. And it is named because of the sound that it makes. It kind of meows like a cat, kind of, sort of. American goldfinch, of course, is a beauty that a lot of folks recognize. And the one on the right is a hermit thrush. So that's a migrant that comes through in the spring and the fall. This year, I saw a number of them in my own backyard. We're getting to the end of spring migration now and the beginning of the breeding season. And that particular species doesn't actually breed in our watershed, but just north of our watershed. But we have some other thrushes that do breed in our region, in the watershed. So as I mentioned, different habitats equal different birds. So you might think a watershed is only about water, but actually the watershed encompasses every kind of habitat that you can imagine. The Darby Creek watershed does, and also every watershed in the whole country, in the whole planet, really. Every person lives in some watershed. So watershed is every inch of the planet, even if you're like, say, in a very dry place and you think, well, I'm not really in a watershed. But a watershed simply signifies where water is going when it falls from the sky. Precipitation, snow melt, storm occurrences, water, even evapotranspiration from plants into the air, and then it forms in clouds and drops back down on us. The water lands somewhere and then the water runs. Sometimes the earth absorbs it, and of course streams and rivers, even the tiniest little trickles, run somewhere. So that's really what a watershed is. And certainly Sue and other folks in the DCVA can explain it much better than I can, but I wanted to put that in there if you wondered why I was talking about things other than streams and creeks. So different habitats support different plants, insects, and birds. Habitat types include woodlands, meadows, fields, and grasslands, backyards and city spaces, wetlands, and waterways. I'm going to talk about each of these. So Woodland Wonders, certainly the Darby Creek watershed includes a lot of woodlands. Just go out your home door and look at your local park, and maybe you even have a couple of trees in your own neighborhood, in your own yard, which is great. So woodlands can be big and small. They don't have to be vast, national forests. They can be little patches of woodlands. All of it matters. And woodland species will seek their preferred style of woods, big and small. From the canopy to the forest floor, birds inhabit all levels of woodlands. I love that we have scarlet tanagers in our region. This is a beautiful bird, lives up to its name. That scarlet red, that's a male scarlet tanager there with a bright blood red color, really. It's quite different from a cardinal. Different color red, and generally found in woodlands in the tops of trees, whereas cardinals, probably folks are familiar with those, are in your backyard and widespread. And the female scarlet tanager, she's actually yellow. So males and females look different. That's an entirely different presentation, but interesting to note. A Cooper's hawk is a woodland species, and they don't need a huge patch. They can be found in neighborhoods, in local parks, certainly in woods. They're a hawk, they're a predator, and they eat other birds, actually. So if you have a feeder in your backyard, you might have a Cooper's hawk come by and check out your birds. Don't be squeamish, everybody's got to eat. And the little birds are a lot more numerous than the Cooper's hawk. So I often root for the predators. They work hard for their meals. And this is a wood thrush, a beautiful sounding bird. Some folks think that the wood thrush makes one of the most beautiful bird songs in all the world, or maybe all North America. They sing a beautiful, gorgeous melody. I can't imitate it. I'm a terrible imitator. But I think it's really interesting that they actually, their vocal cords are different than ours, where they're actually able to self-harmonize. So kind of sending out or creating two different tracks, if you will, musical tracks together simultaneously to create such a beautiful sound. And wood thrushes are unfortunately on the decline in our area, but they breed in woodland areas in the watershed for sure. They are ground or very low nesting birds. So as deer browse becomes more and more prevalent, demolishing understory in many of our woodlands, birds like wood thrushes and ovenbirds and other woodland low nesters or ground nesters, they can't find a good place to nest. They need cover. If there's no cover, the wood thrush is like, hey, I'm getting out of here. There's nowhere for me to hide or hide my babies or build a nest. There's nothing to build it on. Birds like the wood thrush rely on fairly large tracts of unfragmented forest. So even if you say, okay, I have this big woods and I'm just going to put a road through the middle, the birds are going to be fine. That doesn't work for the wood thrush. They need contiguous space uninterrupted. Also in our woodlands, we have beautiful, colorful warblers that fill the woodlands with song. Folks definitely notice warblers, I know, in the springtime, all around our region, and this applies to near waterways and streams, in woods, largely in woods, but even in woods edges, which I'll talk about that type of habitat in a little bit, but beautiful, tiny little birds, often making gorgeous songs. You might have heard of the dawn chorus, which is often warblers singing their melodies as they're migrating through our region or seeking out nesting territories within our region. So there are more than 30 species of warblers that move through our region. I knew I didn't have space or time to show them all here today, but I wanted to highlight at least these 4 because these 4 actually stop here. They overwintered in Central or South America, hundreds or thousands of miles away. During spring migration, warblers take flight. They fly huge long distances. This is a tiny little bird, just a couple of inches, weighs so little, couple of ounces. They fly through tremendous conditions, very perilous journeys for small birds like this, for any birds of any size, but they land in our area and they put down to feed and forage and rest. And maybe some migratory species of warblers are continuing their journey farther north. Millions of birds actually nest and breed in the boreal forests of Canada. But we're just talking about the Darby Creek watershed today. So these 4 species nest right here. And maybe you have seen yellow warblers, which are widespread in many areas of our region. And sometimes people might think they're canary if they're not sure, they haven't gotten a good look at it. It's a good bird to learn, bright yellow with that little bit of red streaking. You can just about see it on the side of the photo here. In the upper right is an American redstart. The beautiful male, black and orange there. Black and white warbler, named easy to figure that one out, right? He matches his name generally, or she, that's a female there. She's actually a little duller. Some of the males can be super duper black and white stripes. And parula or parula, different pronunciation, but all of these nest in our area. So keep your eyes up to the tops of trees. You might get a little bit of warbler neck. That's an affliction of birders in the springtime. They can be quite high. They can be tough to see when the leaves all start leafing out, but they're beautiful. So keep an eye out for those if you're out and about in the watershed. So woodpeckers. So I can't talk about woods without talking about woodpeckers. Of course, it makes sense that they are found in the woods. Multiple species are found here in the watershed. And woodpeckers in general are great fun to see. They are viewable. They don't hide as much as the warblers. Pretty good size birds, that red-bellied woodpecker in the center there. If you have a backyard feeder or a couple trees in your backyard, chances are you've got red-bellied woodpeckers in your neighborhood. Look at that beautiful red cap and nape of that bird there. The downy woodpecker is also common in our region, and its cousin, the hairy woodpecker, which looks very similar, just a little bigger version of the downy. The northern flicker is also a beautiful woodpecker. Look at those amazing textures and colors on that bird. They live in trees and nest in trees, but they forage actually on the ground. In fact, I debated, I had a couple of different photos of northern flickers, and they showed the bird in my backyard on grass. But I thought, well, we're talking about woodland, so I'll find a picture of the bird. I think actually it is standing on some like ground debris there. They look for grubs and worms and things on the ground, almost like robins, but such a beautiful bird with the speckles there and the black neck band, and the wing and undertail have a yellow tinge. You can see that in the photo there, and when they flash across your yard, you can see that underneath. It's beautiful. They're really fun to see and quite vocal. The nuthatch is not technically a woodpecker, but I wanted to include it here because, of course, you find them in the woods, you find them on trees, often with other woodpeckers or other species in mixed flocks. The white-breasted nuthatch, so it's a cute little bird. You can see they're kind of a little bit pot-bellied. And even in the photo, the bird is facing downwards. You can see that, right? So it's one of very few species of birds that can actually walk, you know, head down a tree. So maybe we hadn't thought about that a whole lot, but that's not something like a human could do, right? So they're built to hold their head upside down, and they have the very thin, sharp, needle-like bill. They pry insects. They look for insects and pry for them under the bark. So really cool to watch nuthatches in action. They're pretty common in our region, nesting all around the watershed, and probably near your backyard as well. If you put out peanut seeds or suet, the nuthatches and the woodpeckers will come to those in your backyard. Unfortunately, loss of habitat to development means less trees for woodpeckers And woodpeckers perform a really important function in the ecosystem. As we all like know and kind of learn from childhood, they're pecking holes in the tree. They don't do that just for fun. They are excavating holes for not only themselves to use, they'll actually excavate a really deep hole, which is incredible. Not so wide, maybe as wide as its head, but its whole body just scoots right inside there. And they nest and raise their own young inside the hole. But next year, they're going to move on and find and excavate a fresh hole. And another species will use that hole for its own nesting. So there are lots of birds that are, the hole is also referred to as a cavity. Lots of species are cavity nesters. Many of them cannot make their own hole. You can see the woodpeckers have very strong bills, enabling them to peck the wood and create a hole out of nothing. It's incredible. So transitioning from woods to meadows and fields, and actually nature, I just wanted to mention, does this in reverse, where fires may clear an area, which starts to grow back as grasses, then shrubs, then trees. That's called succession or successional habitat, when the habitat might be in the middle of, say, from a clearing and it hasn't gotten its way all the way to a forest. Pennsylvania wants to be a forest. That's what was here before, settlers, before human populations got so big. Pennsylvania was a massive woods. But succession, so the woods to the meadows, going backwards, so to speak. American woodcock is a great example of a species increasingly rare, but in the watershed, that depend on woodlands. But they like wet woodlands, so lowland woodlands near clean waters, waterways, streams, kind of floodplain, maybe a little bit of lowland areas, and they like the woodlands to be near a meadow. They nest in the woods. They use their long, soft-tipped bill to probe for worms and things that are in the soil, but they use the meadows for their display, courtship displays, and that happens in February and March. And if anyone ever gets a chance, you might hear about an event called like a woodcock walk, or let's go out and look for woodcocks, like maybe in February or March. And you're actually looking for them at dusk, and the males will make this peep sound, and then they'll fly up into the air and twirl around and flutter their wings, and you can hear that sound as well. It's really quite neat to experience that in the field. And you can see in the photo here, the woodcock is in the snow. So they just keep on doing their thing, whether it's deep snows in the winter or a little bit nicer weather in March. Woodcocks are really cool species. They're actually a shorebird, but I never think of them as a shorebird because they're not found along the coast or the shore. They're not behaving like our typical shorebirds. I showed here two flycatchers, which I know the flycatchers sometimes get a little short shrift in bird presentations or discussions. They don't have the flashy colors, but I think their behaviors are really cool. And these two species are widespread, easy to see in our region. The eastern phoebe there, it's a bird that actually says its name. So it goes Phoebe, Phoebe, which is pretty cool. Sorry for the poor mimic imitation there. But they also make this really distinctive behavior when they're land perched on branches there. They bob their tail, and they bob their tail continuously. So even if you just were to watch that bird for like a moment or a minute or two, you would see it bobbing its tail. So it's kind of a gray, nondescript bird. I think they're handsome, but that tail bobbing is distinctive for a phoebe. The kingbird at the bottom there, that is a feisty flycatcher. They like to perch high on branches or out in the open, just like the photo depicts there, which is a great representation there. They make bold sounds and they flash their wings and their tail. Their tail is quite distinctive. It looks like it was just dipped in white paint there, right? You can just see in the photo a little bit of white at the end of the tail. So that's a good field mark for identifying a kingbird. But species that the phoebe and the kingbird, they're looking for insects, grasshoppers, butterflies, moths in meadows and near scrubby areas, field areas, and they catch insects on the wing. So they've got a little, you can see a sharp little bill there that, think of tweezers. They would just like perch, look out, and then when they see an insect go by, fly off their perch, grab it, come back and gobble it, or maybe bring it to their nest to feed their young. Quite a skill. So continuing in the habitat ranges, we go from woodlands to fields and thickets. So a lot of different species depend on fields and thickets. Sometimes fields and thickets are occur in what we call edge habitat. So trees meet shrubs, shrubs meet open areas, maybe meet more trees. So this kind of field, thicket, edge habitat is a great place to look for a wide variety of species. Because some will like a little shrub, some will like a tall tree, some will like short grass. And if you're in an area, a small area that encompasses all of that, maybe near ball fields or local parks, neighborhoods, great places to look for birds. You don't need to be in vast national park green spaces. And of course, we know the Darby Creek watershed is a pretty developed area. Cavity nesters like tree swallows, that's that beautiful blue and white bird there, the beautiful turquoise bird, the eastern bluebird, that's a female there, she's a little duller, but the male is, you know, bright blue back with the orange chest there. Those are two cavity nesting species that we talked about. They certainly don't, they're not built to make their own hole. You can see their bills there, they're actually insect eaters, but they are looking for holes or cavities to nest and raise their young. So natural lands and lots of volunteers and lots of organizations install nest boxes, and you can put up a nest box in your own backyard and you may attract one of these species to nest in your home. So a lot of the Darby Creek watershed we know is densely developed. Delaware County, especially the eastern side of Delaware County, where much of the watershed encompasses, and certainly the edge of Philadelphia, we know that these are densely developed spaces with a lot of houses and retail and a lot of concrete, unfortunately or fortunately, but you know, humans need places to live and places to shop as well. But the birds and the wildlife also need green space. Of course, if we can preserve as much green space as possible and balance that out with human needs, that's the ideal situation. But I certainly advocate and suggest that folks, no matter how small or big your yard is, to consider dedicating as much as you can to healthy native plant green spaces set up for birds and wildlife. And you don't have to do a lot. Minimize the amount of grass coverage. So this is actually a photo of my own backyard. And amazingly, this year looked incredible just a couple of weeks ago in the early spring there. You can certainly see I have a bit of lawn there, but the lawn is actually is diminishing a little bit each year as I add a little bit more to these edge beds here, and the shrubs get ever larger and they creep out, so then I move the bed out. I don't need a lot of grass, and I certainly don't use any pesticides and really very minimal herbicide use. I do have some invasive species like invasive Japanese honeysuckle, lesser celandine. I try to stay on top of that. This space is less than a quarter acre, and in fact, the quarter acre includes my house. So so maybe it's half of that. I'm not sure how much. I haven't actually measured, but it's not a very big space at all. The back corner there that you can see through the picture, the kind of a bright sunny space back there, that's the neighbor. So it's not a huge space, and wildlife really enjoy a yard like this. And I really encourage folks to put in their own backyard spaces, or even if you just have access to like a patio planter, maybe you live in an apartment. Window box, those are habitat for birds. So if you can avoid the chemicals, the wildlife will come, and especially you're supporting the insects that support the birds, and that's really the key to the food chain. Here I'm just showing a Carolina wren. That's such a fun bird to have in your yard. A family has already nested once. It's what, May 20 something, and I'm sure that another family will come along and try again. You can see a bit of water there in the water bath. So food, water, shelter, cover, lots of places for birds to hide here in the shrubbery. And I've even got a nest box there for birds. The blue jay is on my feeder. The feeders are just to the left outside the picture there. And feeders are fun. I know sometimes folks ask, well, like, am I sustaining the birds, or what if I go away on vacation and they're not filled? Are birds gonna, you know, what are the birds gonna do? It's okay. The birds are getting sustenance from feeders, but they will find other things to eat if your feeders are not filled 100% of the time. And especially in yards with diversity of native plants, which the healthy watersheds have a huge diversity of plants to support all of the bio-wildlife that lives there. Natural Lands is fortunate to have Doug Tallamy, Dr. Doug Tallamy, a professor of, I think he's a professor of entomology, but he does huge amounts of work of ecologically sustainable gardening and landscaping, and he really advocates that, like, if every homeowner converted even half of their lawn, just half, he's even willing to let the other half be grass. I don't know why people like to mow, but if you can convert even half of your lawn, no matter how big, tiny little lawn, to native plants, you would make a huge difference. Millions of acres would be supported and thriving to sustain the wildlife. So, and Natural Lands is fortunate that Doug is actually on our board. I think I started to say that. So, and advisory capacity. So he's published several books that I highly recommend. One is Bringing Nature Home. That's my favorite one. Very accessible. A lot of great information about the connections between habitats and birds. So I just wanted to highlight here some raptors around the watershed. So raptors are everywhere. Folks can go out into all different habitats and look up to the skies, look up to a tree, look over to a shrub, and you might be lucky to see an eagle, owls, hawks, falcons. You might see an osprey if you're close to the water. And we are so fortunate in our region to have such a great diversity of these beautiful raptors. And I'll talk about in a moment, you can see, of course, the eagle there and the osprey are both very much water dependent, and so very directly tied to the health of watersheds. And vultures. So sometimes I lead, well, in normal times, and I will get back to, I lead in-person bird walks at John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge. And some folks are brand new to birding, and sometimes there's kids, and they're always so curious. It's fantastic to get such great questions, and people are often asking about vultures. And sometimes, you know, I hear they're like, ew, vultures, they're ugly. So I'm not going to judge about how vultures looks. You know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. However, I want to advance the idea that vultures are really important to our ecosystem. They are scavengers. Here in southeastern Pennsylvania, or in North America, we have black vultures and turkey vultures, two different species of vultures. And both of them occur very commonly in our region. The black vulture, just as a visual and ID, bird ID points here, the black vulture is more compact species. You can see it's got white on the wingtips. The lower wing is in the shadow, but it certainly has white wingtips on both sides. It actually does have a black head or dark head. You might see this bird a lot higher in the sky, and you might not be able to tell what color its head is, chances are, but it's very compact with a short tail. If you kind of lean back and squint, you might even think it has virtually no tail. Compare that to the turkey vulture on the right, which has big swath of white under the wings. The trailing edge of the wings is a big area of white or silver color, and certainly a longer tail. Also, the turkey vulture flies in a V. So it, like, even just at a glance high in the sky, if you watch the vulture for a moment, you might say, is that a hawk, or is that a vulture or an eagle? It holds its wings in a V. That's called a dihedral. And it often does not flap. It will soar without flapping for very, very long distances. So you can tell that. But ID aside, the vultures are performing such an important service to our ecosystem. They are cleaning up carcasses, and unfortunately we've got lots of dead things around us, dead deer, animals, things that die naturally in the forest. And vultures are scavenging off of those. And if not for vultures, we would have, as a society, a much bigger problem with diseases. So a little love to our vultures out there, and it's actually, they are very cool if you come upon some together in a flock, feeding at maybe a dead deer on the side of the road. Be grateful that they are. So creeks, streams, and rivers, of course, the Darby Creek watershed, as I mentioned earlier, there's over 120 linear stream miles in our watershed. So creeks, large and small, all different sizes and lengths. And the health of those creeks and streams and rivers is really important to birds that directly depend upon these waterways. So that small gray bird there with the black head, folks probably maybe know that that is a belted kingfisher. And you can find those on the Darby Creek, the Cobbs Creek, even the smaller tributaries. They live on those creeks. They race up and down the creeks. They have a very loud rattling call. It's really cool if you get to see it and hear it. And they perch on branches overhanging the creek. And they are literally looking down into the water, waiting for a fish or maybe a frog to go by, unsuspecting, and they will just dart into the water at high speed. They have that long, sharp bill there and grab that fish. Really cool to see that. I'm guessing everyone knows mallards, one of the most widespread waterfowl species in the world, found across the world. So that's a beautiful mallard there. I know we take them for granted because they're so common, but just think if you maybe were a person who had never really seen one before, and you're like, wow, look at the electric colors on that bird. And the same with the wood duck. It is some people's favorite bird in all of North America. The male wood duck there with a beautiful orange and red and green and black and white and brown multicolors, spectacular photo with the red eye ring. And these are widespread waterfowl breeding in our region, and they depend certainly on clean waterways. Folks probably know that wood duck is named because even though it's a duck and it certainly depends on water, much of its life is in and around the water, but they actually breed in trees, so in woods. So they need woods next to creeks and streams and rivers. If you have a stream that runs through like a huge grassy area and there's absolutely nothing around that stream, like not a single shrub or a tree, it's likely that that stream is not very healthy for multiple reasons, but it would definitely not ever support a wood duck because the wood duck would have nowhere for it to lay its nest. And they actually go, they're a cavity nester. They find a hole often very high in a tree. And I recommend Google the wood duck. If you get a chance, look for a video. Wood ducks like fledging or wood duck chicks. They nest high in a tree when the ducklings all hatch, and they lay a lot of eggs, 20, 25 eggs, that many. The little ducklings are little fuzzballs, and within a couple of days of their life, they're all ready to leap out of the tree. And if you were to see it, it might make your heart stop. Fortunately, the little chicks do bounce at the bottom, and they're just fine. And mom's down there waiting, like anxiously, come on, come on, come on. And the ducklings leap out of the tree, land on the ground, and then they follow mom over to the water, which is not far away. Very cool. That brings me to my favorite spot in the Darby Creek watershed is, and folks know me, that I spend a lot of time at John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge. The refuge is an amazing place. It's where I first learned about birds and started birding and met wonderful people, some of my best friends there. It's a fantastic community, a fantastic space. The staff there are so dedicated in managing nearly 1,000 acres of space for the benefit of wildlife and the community. A lot of community engagement going on at Heinz. The refuge encompasses the largest freshwater tidal marsh in Pennsylvania. So thinking about the map at the beginning, the Darby Creek and the Cobbs Creek, they come together just upstream from the refuge. Literally, I think it's 1 mile. The Cobbs comes into the Darby, and the waters of the two join together, go through the refuge. And in this photo, that's me at the bottom there scanning they call it an impoundment. You might call it a lake. It's not quite a lake, but close enough. The stream is behind me. So not in the photo, but the stream or the river eventually makes its way to a vast marshland, and the water just spreads out across the marsh, and then soon after meets the Delaware River. So we're talking just south of the Philadelphia airport where that happens. The Heinz Refuge is an urban oasis just teeming with bird diversity, more than 300 species, probably just about all the species in the entire Darby Creek watershed can be found in Heinz Refuge, or more likely, they can be found in Heinz Refuge and maybe nowhere else in the watershed because of this unique vast marshland area that the refuge encompasses. Bald eagles have been nesting at Heinz Refuge for more than a decade. When I first started birding, there were no bald eagles. Now it is actually, birds are never a guarantee, but if you go there, you have a pretty good chance of seeing eagles overhead during the, especially during the spring and the summer. Like even right now, folks see eagles just if you go for a walk there. It's amazing. There are some very special species of concern that nest and utilize the resources of Heinz Refuge, and I'll talk about those in a moment. And I wanted to do a shout out. The Darby Creek Valley Association has been hosting literally decades, and Sue can clarify at the end how many years. I think it's more than 25 consecutive years of Darby Creek cleanups, and the refuge is certainly participating in those. So through multiple, even refuge managers and staffers, but everyone has always done an annual cleanup there, and they do clean up literally tons of trash out of the waterways. And in fact, even when we see the trash, and in fact now we see plastic, which is unfortunately really challenging because it does not biodegrade, it never goes away. Decades ago, trash was more like tin and metal, which eventually rusts, even though it takes a long time as well. Paper goes away faster, of course, biodegrades. But all this trash in the refuge, but believe it or not, it's a lot cleaner now than it was even just 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. The river just gets cleaner and cleaner. Challenges aside, and those challenges are ongoing. But healthy marshes host very secretive birds, and wetlands and marshes are crucial for community health as well as health of the birds. So healthy wetlands act as sponges. They soak up toxins and stormwater runoff, which is such an important function that Heinz Refuge is actually supporting Eastwick, the community in Southwest Philadelphia, and communities in Delaware County at the bottom of the marshland. So right where you, if you've been to Heinz Refuge, the visitor center, right there entering off of Lindbergh Boulevard in Southwest Philadelphia, and also communities all around the refuge in Delaware County, in Essington, Holcroft, Tinicum. The name of the marsh is Tinicum. The whole refuge is John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge at Tinicum. That's the historical name of the marsh. In this marsh are species in Pennsylvania that are considered threatened, near threatened, species of concern. Things like marsh wren, great egret, and I'm highlighting here some of the more secretive marsh birds that make their home in the refuge. American bittern doesn't nest at Heinz Refuge, but relies upon the refuge for resources during spring and fall migration. And you can see in the photo there, that's actually an amazing photo. The bird is relatively out in the open. That's the big bird on the top left there, the American bittern. It's actually pretty chunky kind of bird. You can see kind of a barrel belly there. It makes like a reed. So that picture is kind of showing it in its quintessential space, brown reeds. And it thinks, okay, I'm gonna put my neck up and I'm gonna just look like a reed. I'm even gonna sway in the breeze. While the reeds are moving back and forth, so does the American bittern's neck. So they're very hard to find unless you've got really sharp eyes and you're very lucky. The Virginia rail on the bottom there, gosh, that's another kind of lucky moment to be able to catch that bird just in the open there. And it's not even that great of a picture, but that is a rail bird. They like to be in secret and nesting in marshy areas, dark corners of the marsh. And they are now nesting at Heinz Refuge when they have not nested in the refuge for decades. And I'm not sure of any other locations in the entire Darby Creek watershed where Virginia rails nest. So, and the same goes for the one at the top there, that's a least bittern. So when I first started birding more than 20 years ago, least bitterns were very, very scarce. They were very rarely seen at Heinz Refuge or anywhere that I went in the whole county, in the whole watershed. It wasn't a bird we talked about or thought much about because it was just kind of out of sight, out of mind. And then about 10 years ago, visitors to the refuge started seeing them. They would just like leap out of the spatterdock or the reeds. And in fact, now there are more nesting pairs that are recorded there each year. So that's a species that has responded to increasing health of the waterways. They're very sensitive to water quality and also water levels, which the refuge can in part manage water levels in the big lake, in the impoundment. So water is life for watershed birds. As the Darby Creek flows into the marshes at Heinz Refuge, millions of gallons of water are life essential. I never tire of looking at these birds. They're generally fairly easy to see with a bit of effort. That one in the center there is a double-crested cormorant, really cool bird that spends its life in the water. It is often diving down for fish, and there's lots of fish in the refuge, in the impoundment and in the waterways. So I don't know anything about fish, sorry, so you can't ask me what the fish are. I know that there's some undesirable fish, including snakeheads, but that's okay. The birds are going to eat them all, and the eagles and the osprey will eat those as well. So the lower one is a green heron. They nest all along the Darby Creek watershed. Green herons, they nest around the refuge. They nest in ponds and lakes in Delaware County and all throughout our region. That's a coot over there, and I know that's a species of concern. Their numbers were plummeting. They are also susceptible to water pollution and toxins. They're sensitive to water quality, and their numbers seem to be fluctuating more on an upward trend than a downward trend. And of course, I think everyone probably knows the Canada geese. And so if you go and take a walk on the refuge and go out onto the big boardwalk they have, you'll see, you might be lucky to see all the birds here on the slide. You'll probably see at least some of them. Pretty much, I can guarantee you're going to see Canada geese. There's a lot of those. Waders are some of my favorite birds, and I just love, so I never tire of seeing waders at Heinz Refuge. Certainly great egrets, great blue herons, night herons. These are birds that you can see in the refuge at the bottom of the watershed. They like these big open expanses of water. Go in the summertime, which is post-breeding. So the birds are done breeding, and then you have many more young ones, which look just like the adults, or similar to in most species cases. And you might see literally hundreds of egrets and great blue herons, and you know, all standing around the shallow waters of the Heinz Refuge Marsh. So, and they, again, are species that need clean water and clean air to breed, to raise their young, to eat the fish and the crabs and the frogs. They need all those resources of the watershed. Just wanted to share a little spectacle of survival on the water. This is just a photo sequence that was taken by a refuge visitor. And I was actually there as well, but these are not my photos. I'm good with binoculars, not good with cameras. So we're on the observation tower, which is that double-decker platform, kind of a half-mile walk out from, or three-quarter-mile walk out from the parking lot. And kind of right in front of us, we saw this great blue heron, and it seemed to have caught a fish, or we really weren't sure. It was just standing there, didn't really catch our attention until the eagle flew in, and look what the heron did. He was not happy whatsoever. The eagle must have seen the fish, got in real close. The heron did what it could, but it couldn't do much. The eagle snatched the fish, and off it went. So great blue heron versus bald eagle. Again, I root for the predators. There's plenty for the eagle, plenty for both of them to eat at Heinz Refuge. So just kind of wrapping up here with the story of the bald eagle and the osprey. It's a very interesting past, and I think sets a foundation for a positive, at least determined future. So, and they really illustrate watershed health and conservation stories. So widespread use of the pesticide DDT deeply affected these two species here and many other species. In about the mid-1900s, so post-World War II, farming, pesticide use was on the rise. The chemical seeped into waterways. It got into fish and frogs and invertebrates, small creatures that live in the water, which were then consumed by the birds. So the chemical DDT didn't outright kill most birds, but it affected other aspects of the birds. For these large raptors here, it actually weakened their eggs so much that incubation crushed the egg. So if you can't reproduce, your population is doomed, right? So these species, their numbers were plummeting. When the Endangered Species Act was created in 1972, there were very few pairs of ospreys and eagles left in Pennsylvania or in the lower 48 states of North America. And these species were among the first added to the list. Also peregrine falcons, pelicans, terns were also affected, many species affected by this terrible chemical. So DDT was banned and as part of the Endangered Species Act, and very strong recovery programs, habitat management and habitat protection programs were implemented, and lo and behold, it made a huge difference, right? Eagles and ospreys are back. So clean waterways was really essential for these birds that eat fish, fish eaters. So bald eagles were delisted in 2005. Their numbers of breeding pairs in the state increase, and ospreys increase as well. If you ever go to the Jersey Shore, I know folks go there on vacation, you'll see a lot of osprey. They're like all along, the waterways and such. So most of our water is now far cleaner now than it was in the 70s and 80s, but challenges are ever present: habitat loss, air pollution, water toxins. But I really believe conservation success can be achieved. Knowledge and information is key. Community engagement is essential. Climate change plans and policy, we must work on those things. Protecting habitat and biodiversity, and partnership initiatives can make these things happen, like Natural Lands and Darby Creek Valley Association and many other great organizations coming together. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today, and shout out to the photographers. As I said, I'm terrible with cameras, so lots of other folks generously shared great photos with Natural Lands for me to use here in the presentation. So I hope you enjoyed it, and happy to take any questions. I think I went a little long, but thank you so much for your patience. So I'll stop screen sharing now, and if there's any questions, Sue Miller can take it along, take it over.
Debbie, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation.
My pleasure.